Hello. Today I want to talk to you about how I learnt to read 52 books a year. The reason I want to make this video is because I feel a lot of the reading motivation, increase your reading videos that are out there are made by people who are professional readers, so people like academics or booktubers. I'm just an ordinary person working a 9 to 5 with normal adult responsibilities who also wanted to read more. So I feel like 52 is a really relatable and realistic amount of books to read in a year. I greatly applaud all of those people that are able to read hundreds and hundreds a year. But for now, this is what I can manage, and I feel like it's really achievable for other people who want to read as well. So let's get into it. So I'm going to start with why I stopped reading books, which was ironically university. So that's sort of a strange thing to have happened, right? Because when you're going to university, you're reading all the time. But unless you're doing a creative writing or literature or some kind of degree related to books, it's probably unlikely that you're reading entire books in one go. Some of them, yes, for sure, but a lot of what I was reading at university in my Japanese studies and Japanese degree were articles and, pieces of writing from textbooks, pieces of writing from all over the place, and it was so interesting. I loved being at university. I'm one of those people that would be a lifelong student if I was, a nepo baby and could do whatever I wanted. But I was reading all the time, but reading was sort of becoming this work-based thing for me, and so it was really hard to approach reading for pleasure with any kind of pleasure. So I've always loved books since I was a kid. I grew up in the country, and books were a way for me to transport myself to other places. I have a really vivid imagination, and I would read the same books over and over again in my room and just dream about going to those places. So I was a reader beforehand, but university sort of recalibrated my relationship with reading. So what changed? What gave me the kick up the butt to start reading for pleasure again? I think it was confronting the amount of books I owned versus the amount of books I'd read. So when I was in university, I lived in a big share house and we had all of this space to just fill with stuff, and as we all know these days, if you live in an urban area and you have access to the internet, it is pretty easy to find giant shelves and other pieces of furniture that you definitely don't need to fill your house. So I had these huge shelves and I would just fill them with books about topics that I thought I would be interested in. So I would go to library sales and, side of the road book barns while driving around on a road trip in the country, or just go to Dimmicks when there's a sale on and buy up books. And it was a great collection. There were so many things in there that probably would have been interesting to read, but with my time taken up with working and also going to university and doing all of the reading for that, I was also at that time trying to break into video games, which is what I work in at the moment. So I was writing voluntary reviews of board games and indie video games, and that would have been around the time I was writing my honours thesis. There were lots of things occupying my mind, and so I wasn't reading for pleasure. I had all of these books, and this was around the time that I first encountered one particular book, which is Marie Kondo's tidying up book, the Spark Joy one. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of it, but you know the book I'm talking about. So I encountered that. I honestly can't remember how, but I read it and I started going through all of my categories of things, and the books, oh, the books. That was a revelation. I decided to count how many books I had read in the last year and make some tough decisions based on that. I didn't even know how many books I had read in the last year. I knew it wasn't very many. And so I started using a little app called Goodreads. Now, disclaimer, I do not use Goodreads anymore because I have ethical problems with the big name of a jungle company that owns Goodreads. But I will say that just the ability to track what I was reading was really helpful for me, not from a let's get competitive with other people about how many books to read, but as a kind of personal best tracker. These days I use Storygraph, but I'm sort of transitioning into just using my journal and having a book log page, and honestly I find that kind of does the same thing. I like to know what date I started a book, what date I finished it, so that I know how long it took me. I like to know if it's fiction or non-fiction, but I've really been able to simplify things down just by using paper again. This is an experiment I'm doing with a lot of digital apps in my life at the moment. But the point is, whatever it is, I recommend sort of taking stock of all of the unread books that you own and then comparing that to how many books you're able to read in a year, or I guess if you want to get into this sooner, even in a month, and you can do the maths upwards from there. But having those numbers was a real wake-up call. So in those first few months, that first year that I was tracking how much I was reading, I think it was something around 12 or 15 books in a year, and it was overwhelmingly fantasy fiction, which is my favorite genre. I am the type of person who likes to read broadly. I like to push myself to read outside of my genre as much as I can, but fantasy fiction is where my heart is, and that is most of what was on that first list. And I just lent into that because I was already being challenged by everything I was reading in university, so the point of my reading was just to get back in touch with reading for pleasure. So I had my Goodreads tracking, and I was working at a modest goal of I think 20 books for that first year that I set the challenge again. I think that would have been for 2016. So the next step after having a goal and sort of doing this big declutter and facing the reality of the perceived reader I wanted to be and the reader I actually was, which I think is really what I'm getting at here, and is what separates us from achieving a lot of our goals, is this idea of who you want to be and who you actually are, and being scared to confront what lays in the middle, which is the mess, which is us. And accepting that mess, accepting where you're at, is probably the first step in achieving anything. So the reader who I am and the reader who I want to be. So I had those things, and the next step is pretty simple. It's just to actually read more. So how did I do that? This is going to be no surprise, but I chose times to read. So ever since I have been young, I've always read when I've gone to bed. That's been my go to sleep activity, and it works for me really well. I've always had pretty good sleep, and I still was doing that. I would say that's how I was getting through those sort of less than 10 books a year, but I just kind of amped it up. So I started, going to bed a bit earlier so that I would have a full 30 minutes or a full 60 minutes to read. During some of this time I was working in a bakery, so I had these really wild early starts and then this time in the afternoon, so really tried to focus more on reading books as a wind down activity for myself. So that was in the early days of pursuing more reading. What happened later was that I also made the morning my reading time when I started to be allowed to work from home. So fast forward a few years to working full time, and lockdowns and the pandemic hit, and we can all work from home all the time, and I had a really long commute at the time that lifestyle change happened. So what I did was I kept getting up at the same time, so it wasn't really a challenge because I already had to get up that time to commute, and instead of commuting I sat in my comfy armchair for an hour and I read, and wow, did my reading increase when I started doing that. I would attribute that partly to the fact that I am a morning person, so reading in the morning really suits my brain. Reading at night to wind down, reading fiction at night works well for me as well, but this is something else I would really recommend you do, is pay attention to what type of genre suits your brain to read when. So for me, sleepy in the evenings, that's a good time for fiction because fiction is easiest for my brain. So sort of two things here, because I know I have friends who really struggle to get through fiction, but non-fiction to them is a breeze. So there's sort of two questions you need to ask yourself here, which is which type of book is easiest for my brain to digest, and what type's hardest. And then the second part is, when am I awake in the day? Am I a morning person, a night person? And use those pieces of information to find a time in the day, even if it's just 20 minutes, 10 minutes, to read. Now, I think this is probably really hard for people who have caring responsibilities, but I would say that it is probably still possible to up your reading a little if you sacrifice another activity. I know that a lot of parents I know wind down with TV. That's fine, no shade. Being parents is really, really hard. But if you're really serious about your reading, you could consider, exchanging that, or better yet, exchange your social media scroll time for reading. It's about making a commitment to that time that you're going to do it. And the other thing is about the place that you're reading. So I mean that literally the physical place that you've set up. You need a nook that suits your brain in order to read. So for me, being in bed, being all cozy, I have a lot of cozy places in my house, but I do have one particular armchair that I really like for reading. If you live in an environment where you don't have that much of your own space, it's still possible to sort of put yourself in the right mentality for reading by having certain things that you might take with you, like a little routine you might do before you read. So say that you are living in a share house as a student and you only have your room and you don't have an armchair, you don't have room for one, you only have your bed. That's fine. Do something like sit the other way on your bed and, make yourself into a little pile of pillows and blankets. Make yourself a certain type of tea, perhaps peppermint, that you are going to come to associate with reading over time. Put on some music that really helps you concentrate and get into the zone. All of these little routine things are going to prime your brain so that when you do them, you are ready to read. So it can be a physical place if you have the luxury of space, but it can also be about setting up a routine that tells your brain it's reading time. So the next thing I want to say is be proud of gradual progress. So obviously you've started this video thinking, wow, look, this person reads 52 books a year. But the whole point of this video is for me to tell you that this is a really recent thing. I have read that many books per year for maybe the past 2 or 3 years. And because I'm a total nerd, I just look around my computer and I actually have this spreadsheet of stats, and I've already got this graph of my total books read per year since 2016. So let me tell you how many books I read each year once I sort of started doing this. So 2016 it was 20 again the next year, then 25, then 2019, oh, your girl got 26. So next year after that is obviously 2020, and I live in Melbourne, Australia, one of the cities that had longest sustained lockdowns in the world, which I'm really grateful for. It kept lots of people alive, and I am a white collar knowledge worker, so I'm not going to say I wasn't tough, but I did have all of this spare time and I filled it with reading, because in 2020 I read 42 books, which as you can see is a big jump from the 26, but it was really about this just destruction of my usual social life and routine, and in its place I built books. I put books in the place of all of those other things, and yeah, so I got 42 in 2020, and then 2021 was 48, and then 2022 was 59. So that was the year that I really, really honed in on a lot of these habits, and still was in lockdown, so I had a lot of time. And then I think last year I may have done 51. So yeah, I know, so blah, frustrating that I didn't finish that last book, but we all know what the end of the year is like in most cultures. Certainly in Western cultures, it's a time of lots of family and other obligations, so that's fine. Got to accept the mess, got to accept where we're at. So 2023, 2023 was 51, and it is 2024 now, and I think I've read 24 books, and I'm halfway through June, and I am optimistic that I will finish 2 more by the end of this month, which puts me exactly on track. The nice thing about the 52 books goal is that it is 1 book a week, so it's really easy to figure out if you are ahead or behind. But my point is, I only got to this level after several years of sustained effort, and progress was slow, and that's fine. I celebrated every, that year that I got 26 rather than 25, I remember feeling so proud of myself, and so I should. Reading is hard in today's culture. We live in this crazy attention economy of vying interests, and reading anything at all is something you should be really proud of. The last piece of advice I want to give is to find ways to engage with your hobby of reading books outside of actually reading books. So obviously there's a balance to this. You don't want to be like on BookTok more than you're reading a book, and also I wouldn't say that BookTok is a meaningful way to engage with what you're reading. What I mean is doing things like writing reviews of the books that you've read. This could be in a journal, you could keep a blog about it, you could even just write reviews that go on Goodreads or Storygraph if they come, you want them to come from a place of critically analysing what you actually thought about what you read rather than making content for the sake of content. I won't get into a rant about Goodreads reviews here, but the point is to have some way to be actually thinking about what you're reading and or sharing that. So one thing that I will say that was positive for me that came out of Goodreads is that the very few people I had on Facebook who were also using Goodreads were automatically added to my Goodreads account. And I discovered that I had several friends who I didn't know were big readers, and some of whom were also really into fantasy fiction. And I got some great recommendations off of them, and it meant that when I would see them in person, I would talk to them more about books, and it sort of built confidence in me to talk to people about books. Maybe that sounds strange, but I think when we have any hobby that's like really close to our hearts, it can be hard to be vulnerable with people and open up to them about what we like and what we care about. And so I will say thank you, Goodreads, for that one thing you did for me, which was connecting me to people who were reading similar things to me. So yeah, you could write reviews, you could talk to friends about it more, you could write in your books if you own physical books. This is a great way to engage further with the text, especially for me. I find if it's non-fiction, sort of highlighting relevant ideas, things that you might want to look up afterwards to engage further with what you've read. Great. The other thing you can obviously do is join a book club. So this is tricky. Obviously, not everyone lives somewhere where there are other people in the community like them who want to read things like what they want to read, but you'd be surprised how many people read or want to read. And so if there isn't one, you might be able to make one, but also you're not going to know if there are book clubs around you unless you start talking about it and telling people you want to join one. This is sort of how I joined all of the book clubs that I've ever been in. Some of them have worked out, some of them haven't. This is the other thing, the taste of the book club. You have to go to figure out if it's sort of going to suit you. Some book clubs are very academic and want to dissect the text. Some of them are more social. Any type of book club is fine. It's about sort of finding your people and finding people who you can talk to about this hobby that you love regularly. So what did I do? I started by looking at local independent bookstores. When I started looking, I lived near a fantastic local independent bookstore, which is called the Chestnut Tree in West Footscray. If you're ever out there, check it out. It is an amazing community space. They do so many events, and they have 2 book clubs, which is General Book Club and Decolonize Your Bookshelf Book Club, and I tried both of them, and I really, really liked that book club. But then I moved away from that neighborhood. I moved further into the city, and it became a bit of a hike to get out there, but I really liked that. I would say that was a really big group of people for a book club, and so that could have been challenging for some people, and it also had to be ticketed because it was in a small space, and so you weren't guaranteed to get there every month, but it was great the times that I went. So you could look around small independent local bookstores to see if they run them. Libraries also often run book clubs. Where I live, they tend to run them more for seniors or for young people, which is fair enough, that's fine, but there aren't many general adult book clubs.
in the libraries in my area, but there might be where you live. So libraries, bookstores. There's also a lot of Discord and online book clubs if that's more your speed. If you don't want to go somewhere, you don't have to. I really value in-person connection, and I'm doing a lot of things to reconnect with that after getting so online during the lockdowns. But yeah, looking on Discord, looking on Facebook groups, these sorts of things, which will link into these Discord communities with book clubs, that's another option. The way that I found the 2 book clubs that I regularly participate in now, so one was a work book club, and I sort of accidentally made someone else at my work start this book club. What happened was that we all got back from Christmas and it was early January and no one really wanted to work, and we were just sort of chatting in the office, and it came up that one of my co-workers, who I really would not have expected to read this, had read Fourth Wing. So there are a bunch of like younger millennials in my office, and of course a few of us had read it, but then there was someone who was sort of way outside of that demographic who was telling us that they'd read The Fourth Wing, and I was like, whoa, I would love to talk with you about that as someone, you know, far outside the bounds of who you would normally expect to see reading Fourth Wing. And so then we were talking about that, and we were having this hallway conversation for like almost an hour, and I jokingly said, oh, we should have a book club, I want a book club, blah blah blah, whatever dumb thing that I said. And then lo and behold, one of the people in this group sends out this email being like, we're starting the Melbourne Book Club. And yeah, it's been great. We meet roughly once a month, and we have a really democratic system of pulling books out of a hat. It's worked pretty well so far. It's definitely helped me read some things that I wouldn't probably have read without the push from the book club. Particular shout out to The Argonauts by Maggie Nielsen. That was mind-blowing and yeah, kind of difficult read to get started on, but once I was into it I was like, phew. Anyway, so that's another good thing that book clubs are good at, is pushing you outside of your taste if that's something you're interested in. So work can be a place. If there are people who you get along with, tell them that you like books. Yeah, who knows, maybe they want to have a book club as well. And then the other book club I'm in was really happenstance. It was just a friend who I used to work with. I was talking to her about books. She mentioned her book club offhand, and then she asked if I wanted to join, and I did, and it's been really lovely. I think that it's strange that both this work book club and this book club with my friend kind of came into my life at the same time, and it seemed kind of like this weird magical thing that was just synchronizing between me and the universe. But really what it was just me talking to people about what I had been doing. Like, that's how the work conversation started. This is how the conversation with the friend started, and I just can't emphasize enough that you should share the things you're interested in, because who knows, the people you're hanging out with may also be interested in them. So I hope that one or more of those things have been helpful to you. Let me know below in the comments where you're at with your reading yearly, what your goals are. I would love to know, and I'll see you next time.